Good afternoon. There's something wrong here because this is supposed to be a learning in retirement, which is designed for people 50 and over. And this audience looks far too young for that. In any case, welcome. Delighted to have you in what I consider our world-class library. It is just a remarkable facility here. I say that it's a combination of a retirement area as well as a preschool because we appeal literally to a wide spectrum of ages. My name is Ted Weil. I am the Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Rancho Mirage, and on behalf of the entire City Council, I welcome you. As a mere formality, if you would be kind enough to double check to make sure that your telephones are put on silent. And I will mention that if you want to be up to date on the program that goes on here, you can pick up a brochure at the door which will list all of the programs. And if you want to get on the mailing list, you can go to the Rancho Mirage Library website, or for that matter, the Learning in Retirement, which is a co-sponsor of this program today. They also have a website, and you can see what they have scheduled. So with that in mind, we're very excited to be able to present to you Dr. Phil Kibort. He'll discuss the men and women who positively or negatively influenced U.S. presidents from Washington to Biden. I'm sure we can all identify with people that have influenced us over the years. The doctor is a retired pediatric gastroenterologist and former chief medical officer of Children's Hospital and clinics in Minnesota. Dr. Kibort's avocation and passion for over 25 years has been U.S. presidential history. He teaches and lectures on presidents in both the Twin Cities and for learning in retirement while here in the Coachella Valley. We're delighted to have him today. And with that, please join me in welcoming Learning in Retirement, Dr. Phil Kibort. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you. Thank all of you for coming. I was expecting about a dozen people, so I'm very pleased to see so many of you have an interest in the topic. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about the mothers and fathers of U.S. presidents, the good ones, the not so good ones, not all of them. I sometimes do this talk with the wives and mothers, but they told me somebody else already gave that talk on wives. And Steve, I hear a little feedback, sort of, it's a bass sound. So does everybody else hear that? Yeah, it's sort of a deep bass. So let us begin. He already introduced me. So this talk is about the women and men who had great impact, both bad and good, on their sons who go on to be the President of the United States. It is not to talk about wives. Now, I have about 18 lectures I give at Learning in Retirement, which is a great program. I'm not here to sell it for you, but it's over 3 semesters. And one of the talks I give is on rankings of presidents. Not my personal rankings, but rankings based on C-SPAN or Quinnipiac, USA Today. Each year, every 4 years, they come out with rankings. Historically, the top presidents in our history are listed as through 1 through 10. Abraham Lincoln and Washington are always 1 and 2. And over the time, the other ones change a little bit. Jefferson has moved down a little in light of all we know about Sally Hemings. Harry Truman, when he finished being president, his popularity rating was at 23%. over the last 70 years, his ratings have gone up, and it's probably because of David McCullough's book on Truman, a great book to read. Anyway, the others are listed. Obama in the last one was rated 10, way too early. Regardless if you're a conservative or a liberal, it is way too early to judge a president until 10 to 20 years later. Even that's early, because you get more information. So the last time they did this, C-SPAN did it in 2017, LBJ was put down as number 10. So we're going to talk about presidents' mothers and fathers, what made them great, their individual accomplishments, their influence on the president themselves regarding their policy and politics, the values, the habits, the behaviors they gave to their children, cultural impact on their own, political impact on their own, and their own popularity. When I am done with this, if any of you want the slides, you'll get my email. You email me. I'm happy to share the slides. I have no proprietary. They're all mine. So, all right. We're going to talk about this group of mothers. They don't always match up with the top 10 presidents. We'll talk about Adams, Lincoln's two mothers, Sarah Roosevelt, Rose Kennedy, LBJ's mother, Rebecca, Nixon's mother, Lillian Carter, Bush 43, because this is the mother's, she's also in the wives' talk, Barbara, Clinton's mother, and Obama's. Abigail Adams as a young woman. I tried to get pictures of them, or paintings when they were young. So who's she the mother of? John Quincy Adams, our 6th president, probably one of the most best prepared people to be a president. I have a talk on that too, but he didn't turn out to be a good president. He turned out to be a great House of Representative after his presidency. All right, Abigail Smith Adams, her nickname was Nabby, mother of John Quincy. She lived who was president from 1825 to 29. She was born in 1744 and died in 1818. Her husband, John Adams, our 2nd president, was our only Federalist president, POTUS, President of the United States. She was called Mrs. President. She was our first Second Lady and our 2nd First Lady. All right. Tremendous amount of communication with her husband John and also Thomas Jefferson, especially when they were in Europe before we were a country, and with her sons. She communicated, she wrote a lot. She came from a very famous family, clergy family, the Quincy Hancock family. You still hear those names in Boston today, over 250 years ago. That's the family she came from. Very open-minded, erudite, very well-read, competent, self-sufficient. When I say self-sufficient, John Adams was away from the home so much. She ran the farm. She ran the property. She ran the businesses. This woman was extremely bright and extremely opinionated. All right. She was separated from John. I wrote a lot. She wrote over 1,200 letters between herself and her husband John, and wrote many, many letters to John Quincy. Quotes from Abigail Adams, great quotes. And she's writing this to her son and her husband. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice and representation. Think about this. 1700s, all right? It's 100 years before even the convention in Seneca, New York, and women wanting the right to vote. And then she says, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable, notice the English spelling, more favorable to them than your ancestors have been. What were her values? What did she convey to John Quincy? Education. John went to Harvard. He expected his sons, and not his daughters, but his daughters were also well educated, go to Harvard. They expected civil service of their children. Virtuous citizens. Abolition. This is in the 1700s, or Civil War is 100 years away. Abolition. Women's rights based on the 18th century, not today, not what we consider the 19th century, but women's rights. Religion, they were very religious. Poetry. She wrote poetry, John wrote poetry, John Quincy wrote poetry. A diary. They all kept diaries. And amazing, from a historical standpoint, it's wonderful to have those diaries. Family was important. and exercise. And I'll talk a little bit about exercise when I talk about John in a few minutes. We're going to skip that. Now we go from the 6th president to the 16th president. Not that the other ones didn't have mothers. They all had mothers. They just weren't as, we don't know as much about them, and they weren't quite as dramatic. So Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president, here is a picture, a portrait that I don't believe, I think someone who made this painting tried to, did it from saying, how do I make a woman look a little bit like Abraham? We have no pictures or actual portraits of Lincoln's mother. Her name is Nancy Hanks Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president from 61 to 65 in 1800. She's born in 1784 and lives to 1818. All right, 34 years. She's 34 years old. She conveyed to him honesty, compassion, curiosity. She died when Abraham was 9 years old. His sister was a few years older. She dies, and I'll talk about his father, who was not such a great father, when he was 9. She dies of milk sickness from snake root plant. I am a gastroenterologist, a pediatric one. I had no idea about this one, so I had to look it up. Cows would eat the snake root plant. Cows can eat the snake root plant, but there's a poison in it that gets into their milk, and when you drink cow's milk, she died of poisoning from that. So I didn't know that. Lincoln has a quote, "All that I am or hope to be, I owe to my angel mother." Nancy Hanks Lincoln. Though he knew her for such a short time, it is said that he remembered her for her warm affection and example. So his father, she dies, he's 9 years old. The father leaves Abraham and his sister. He leaves them for 6 to 9 months. Leaves them in the middle, in a log cabin, barely any food, no provisions. He goes away to find another wife. And his next wife is this woman. Not the greatest picture, but her name is Sarah Bush Johnston Lincoln, stepmother to Abraham. She already had 3 children of her own, so Abraham all of a sudden has siblings. She gave him stability, strength. He became a human again. She gave him books to read. He had no books to read other than a Bible. She recognized his intellect. She was loving. She was kind. She encouraged. And as I said, we'll talk a little bit about his fathers when we get to the fathers. Anybody want to guess who this future president is? Oh, I think I heard it. Somebody? Franklin Roosevelt. All right? Look at that picture there. It's hard to see. His mother, he looks more like if you look at his mother's face, you see his face a little more. All right? Sarah Ann Delano Roosevelt. FDR is our 32nd president. She was born in 1854, lived a long life. She lived to 1951. She was the second wife of James Roosevelt. She was the grand dame for James Roosevelt. But he dies early when she's 40 years old. So she is a widow. She is a widow a long time. She comes from American Old Dutch aristocracy. They made their money in the opium business. But to be fair, in those days, it was legal. All right, so this was opium from China in those times, and they made their money. FDR is her only child, and he is spoiled from her. Franklin was a Delano. They come from the 1621 Mayflower. She was a little snobbish, always cited her family's heritage, a devoted. Today we would call her a helicopter mom. She was around all the time, all the time. He was homeschooled till he later went into high school and into college, but he was homeschooled in New York, upstate New York. Here's a picture as she's older, domineering, formidable, self-reliant, and responsible. She's widowed at 40. She buys Franklin and Eleanor, they were married, she buys a house for them. Okay, they has a lot of money. But she buys a house right next door to her house. And not only is it next door, it has a little connection, a skyway like we have in Minnesota because it's so damn cold. So she built a skyway, not because it was so cold, but she could just go over. All right. To her credit, she actually is the first mother of a president to vote for her son. She supported Eleanor. Many of you know I have a talk on scandals. And one of the scandals was when Franklin Roosevelt was early in his relationship with Eleanor. He had an affair with Eleanor's secretary, Lucy Mercer. And Eleanor wanted to divorce him right away, and Sarah convinced her not to because she knew it would kill his political career. So she convinced Eleanor to stay with him. And then, of course, there's a whole different change in Eleanor's relationship with him. She always gave, when Franklin got polio, I have a talk on health, by the way, and polio, only 1% to 2% of adults who got polio in those days became paralyzed. As a pediatrician, it's much more common in kids if you get polio. But adults didn't have paralysis, but FDR was one of that 1% to 2%. When he got polio, Sarah, the mother, said, "You should be done, no more politics." Eleanor, to her credit, said, "No, you're going to stick this out. You have much to give." What were the values she conveyed to FDR? Education, ambition, preparation for politics, public service, philanthropy, resilience, and the importance of family. Recommend to any of you who are interested, this is a recent book that just came out in the last 6 months, Passionate Mothers, Powerful Sons. This is the story of Jenny Churchill and Sarah Roosevelt and how they compared and during the same time, because Eleanor and Franklin and Winston were so close. Very good book if you're interested. Who's this? Any guesses? A young woman? We're going on to a new president here. Good guess. Rose Kennedy. Beautiful woman here. Rose Elizabeth Fitzgerald Kennedy. JFK is our 35th president. She's born in 1890 and lives till 1985, another long life. She comes from the lace curtain Irish Catholic community of Boston. This was the wealthy Irish of Boston. She marries Joe Sr., and we'll talk about him. He comes from the poor side of the Irish Boston. Her father is the mayor of Boston, John Francis Honeyfitz Fitzgerald. When she finishes high school, she has a choice. Should I go to Wellesley College or should I go to the Sacred Heart? She elects to go to Sacred Heart. She was a very devout Catholic woman, very devout. Wife of Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., we'll talk about him, who is the ambassador to the court of St. James. She has 9 children in 18 years. 9 children in 18 years. She, of course, the most famous of the 3 right now were JFK, RFK, and Ted, but we'll talk about the others. I love this picture. I just love this picture. This is the whole family, and I said to myself, who is this young girl? Who is that? That's Teddy. That's Teddy. I'm thinking, how did they dress him? What's going on here? That was Teddy. That's Teddy Kennedy. And so you can see the whole family from Joe, the older brother, to Jack. Rose Kennedy, she lost children, so she had 9 children in her lifetime. She saw the death of Joe, Kik, Rosemary, Jack, and Bobby. Joe Kennedy, the husband, was unfaithful. He had an affair with Gloria Swanson. Probably had other affairs. She was on multiple medications for anxiety and depression. She got to meet Pope Pius XII twice, who blessed her directly. For her, this was a major thing for her. She understood politics because of her father, the mayor of Boston. And from my standpoint, she lived a Greek tragedy. Greek tragedy, to lose so many children during her life. Rose and JFK, his determination, so John Kennedy's determination to follow his parents' exhortation issued regularly to their kids to contribute to society, to believe in something greater than themselves, and to act accordingly. Rose would be faulted. One could say she was obsessive compulsive. She had index cards for all her children and sort of lists. I say that jokingly because my wife is sitting in the front row and she's saying, she's just like you, Phil. She's crazy. she focused more on efficiency. I guess if you have 9 kids, you better be efficient, you know. As one close friend told the biographer, Joe, the father, provided the fire in the family, but Rose provided the steel. Jack inherited a lasting interest in history and in books and an abiding curiosity about the world. When he went to college, he was already interested in history, and it came from his mother. Love this picture. You're looking at LBJ. He looks exactly the same as a kid, right? Looks exactly the same. Look at the ears. I mean, the same. All right. His mother is Rebecca Baines Johnson. She was born in 1881. Also, good long life, 1958. She had prominent Texas ancestors, cultured youth. Her father, Samuel Ely Johnson, she married Samuel Ely Johnson Jr. in 1907, but it was a terrible marriage. A very grim life, very poor. Her father was the Secretary of State in Texas, had a lot of political connections. Politics was always discussed at home. But she herself was like an emotional orphan. Her parents weren't around. Her dad was a politician. She was an emotional orphan, and that had impact. So not only an emotional orphan, a poor marriage. Poverty as an adolescent, poverty in marriage. She was very bitter about her marriage. Here's a picture of her as younger. What values? She went to college. She went to Baylor University. She had very high expectations of LBJ, led to his narcissistic personality. They had 5 children, but Lyndon was number 1. And, she had stern moralistic demands, emotionally connected to LBJ. Is it for me? No, it's okay. She was emotionally connected to LBJ too much. It was a pathological relationship. And LBJ was always trying to please his mother and making sure what she thought she approved. But she also said, you serve the public, you have integrity, you help those in need, and we expect hard work. And LBJ, regardless, his legacy unfortunately turned out to be Vietnam. Prior to that, his legacy would have been one of great help to society, whether you believed in those politics or not. But he got that from his mother. Little boy Nixon. You see the same face there too. Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon loved his mother. He did have a quote once said, she will have no book written about her, but she was a saint. Hannah Milhouse Nixon. Richard's our 37th president from 1865 to 1967, so she lived a good life. Quakers. Richard Nixon was a Quaker. According to him, his mother was a saint. Quaker values, middle class. They grew up in Whittier, California, Yorba Linda, but dirt poor. Dirt poor. They had no money, and the father's businesses failed twice, and I'll talk about the father. Nixon had 2 brothers who died of tuberculosis. And as a Republican president, he was in favor of national health insurance. All right? And it's because he saw how bad it was when you don't have health insurance, and his mother took care of the boys in Arizona that left the home a lot. And so that's why. They had a failed farm, businesses failed. She made pies to sell to survive, but little emotion. This may be why Richard Nixon was Richard Nixon. Little emotion attached. She didn't convey love. She had rules. She set up the home for them, but she didn't. There was no hugging going on in that family. They believed in public service. Nixon also was obsessed with what his mother would think. When he lost in 1960 to JFK for the election, a close election, his mother said, don't you give up. Don't let anybody tell you that you're through. Jimmy Carter. So even if they're not one of our top presidents, and he's not rated, he's middling at best right now, but very impressive mother, and you'll know this. So here's him as a little boy. Bessie Lillian Gordy Carter, 1898 to 1983. Jimmy is our 39th president. He is the only president who took the oath of office where he didn't use his full name. He raised his hand, Jimmy Carter. He didn't say James E. Carter. So he did that, but he's always been known as Jimmy Carter. She goes to nursing school, Grady Memorial, in 1923. What is most amazing, she went to the Peace Corps in India, look at how old, at 68 years of age. I can barely get up in the morning. She's 68 years of age. She goes to the Peace Corps. She believed in humanitarian values. They lived in Plains, Georgia. They were peanut farmers. She is remotely second half cousins with Berry Gordian from Motown. So you're going to have to think about your genetics and figuring out what a second half cousin is. Here's a picture of her a little younger, Miss Lillian, always open to African Americans in their town. Even though she was an RN, she acted like a nurse practitioner. She was doing beyond her license in those days, but she gave people care. She was a Bible study person, but not a churchgoer. Modest, down to earth. When Jimmy Carter said to his mother, "Mom, I'm going to run for president," she said to him, "President of what?" She couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe it. She had much more impact on Jimmy Carter than the father. Some quotes from Carter about his mom. "I think my mother's life personifies better than anybody I know what America ought to be. She believed in peace, humility, service of others, human rights, forgiveness. She was strong-willed but still adhering to the basic moral values that make America a great nation." So take that, what he learned from his mother, and how he applied it to his presidency. Whether it was a good one or a bad one, you knew that that's where his focus was. He also said to take on new challenges and do what is right, even though sometimes the consequences, politically speaking, were not good. We'll move on to Barbara Bush, one of the strongest ones when it comes to mothers. Barbara Bush, she is, of course, the wife of H.W. Bush, number 41, and the mother of George W., 43. She was born in 1925, lived to 2018. In her family, her nickname was the Enforcer. She's the president's wife, VP. She was a VP wife, came from a wealthy family. She had 6 children. You know, most of you are aware she lost a child to leukemia, Robin, in 1953. She was also a governor's mother, Jeb, and trusted advisor. She stood for family, integrity, and service. Here's a picture of her as a young woman. She believed in universal literacy. That was her passion. When you hear the word Barbara Pierce Bush, Pierce was Franklin Pierce, our 14th president. All right? So she was related to the 14th president, Franklin Pierce. And I may be talking about his father. She supported ERA and pro-choice. Interesting, Republican husbands in politics, but she supported it well before it even changed the way we look at it, as did Betty Ford. I read about 15 pages a night on American presidents in chronological order. I keep going through biography after biography. I'm just on Gerald Ford. I'm almost done with it. I have 6 more pages to go. But I was just amazed at Betty Ford. And both of these women stood up and said to their husbands, "This is what I believe in, and I'm going to say it regardless of your politics." All right? She had Graves' disease, which is hypothyroidism. And sometimes you see all these commercials now for when the eyeballs bulge out, it's because it increases the fat behind your eyeball, and it makes your eyeball look like it's coming out. So you take medicines to relieve that. Graves' disease is a thyroid disease. She was a true matriarch, married 73 years. They moved homes 29 times. All right? She was the family advocate, but she was not an arrogant person. She always wore fake pearls. John Meacham, if you have an opportunity, you could go to YouTube and look at and listen to Barbara Bush's eulogy by John Meacham. John Meacham is a great writer on presidents. If you have a chance to read the books he's written, and it's only 8 minutes, but he talks about her. Her name was Bar, Mom, Mother, Ganny, the Silver Fox. He says she's honest and loving, raised a family, lost a daughter, kept the family together. Congeniality, civility, and grace. She always put country above party. Miss that kind of stuff nowadays. Country above party and service to others. Resilient, the rock of the family, always there. Never complain, love, strength, and opinions. This picture I have is one where, if you remember in the early 80s, in the mid-80s, when HIV, AIDS, we didn't even know what it was yet, everybody was so afraid you could catch it from everybody. And this is a little baby that got AIDS from the mother when she was delivered vaginally and got AIDS. Barbara Bush was willing to go to the hospital, picks that baby up and hugs that baby. That made a statement to the American public. That's the kind of person she was. All right, Jefferson Clinton, William Jefferson, look at that picture. All right. His mother, now there's a reason here. Listen to this. Her name is Virginia Dell Cassidy Blythe Clinton Dwyer Kelly. Bill is our 42nd president. She's born in 23, a nurse anesthetist. Her father was an iceman in Arkansas, grocer. Mom was a nurse. They sold to customers, African Americans. William Jefferson Bly, so Bill's father, biological father, died in a car accident 3 months before he was born. So Virginia was his fifth wife. Now we think, okay, it's his fifth wife, but let's watch about her a little bit. She then goes and marries Roger Clinton Sr., the man down on the motorcycle here, who Bill takes his name, but he's an alcoholic and very abusive to her. Virginia Clinton was divorced and remarried 4 times. So there's a lot of relationships going on here. She had resilience and determination. He did not adopt Bill, but 15 years old, Bill takes on his surname. She promotes Bill's talents, drive, and education, and also conveyed compassion and empathy. This is a great picture. This is Bill Clinton in high school shaking hands with JFK. Think about that. That's cool. That here he's in high school shaking hands, and you can already see in Clinton's face, I'm going to be in this job. I'm going to be in this job. Any guesses who this is? A singular woman. This is Obama's mother. Obama's mother's name, Stanley Ann Dunham. Dr. Stanley Ann Dunham. Why Stanley? She was named after her father. He wanted a boy. So it was Stanley Ann, so her name. She was an anthropologist in economics and rural economy. She grew up in Wichita, Kansas. They moved to Hawaii, lived in Indonesia. She lived on food stamps. She worked for the U.S. Agency for International Development. Of course, a dominant figure in Barack's formative years. She instilled values in him about being duties to others. She marries Barack Obama Sr., who, by the way, was married in Kenya. They were only married for 3 years. She separates from his father after he left Hawaii to go to Harvard to get a graduate degree. She marries a second husband, Lolo Soetoro, and they were married from 65 to 80. The grandparents raised Obama. He moved to Jakarta, Indonesia when he was 6 years old, but she was concerned he wasn't going to get a strong education, so she sends him back with the grandparents to get educated back in the United States. She gets her PhD in 1992. All right, she's already close to 50 years old and she gets her PhD, not easy to do. She exposes Obama to different cultures, social justice. He is separated from his half-sister. It conveys independence and self-reliance. She dies of ovarian and uterine cancer. And again, the influence of a parent on the future president. Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, closer to more of national insurance. He saw his mother suffer because she didn't have insurance. So it is amazing what happens to our childhood, how it impacts what we do in life and how we end up, what we think about. So let us go on. Now we're going to go to the other side. We're going to go to the fathers, the good, the bad, the worst. Mothers and wives are much more interesting, and that shouldn't be surprising to any of you. And there's definitely much more information about the wives and mothers than there are fathers. Again, I'm going to look at which fathers had impact on the presidents, their values, behaviors, actions. Were they great and impactful men themselves? During the adult years, what impact did they have on the presidents? and which ones had negative impact. What I found interesting recently was a quote I saw here is, some historians and psychologists have marveled at how many of the most significant figures in history lost a parent at a very early age, either to death or abandonment. These are what one psychologist termed eminent orphans. So each one of the presidents I listed here lost their father early in their life. And it had to have impact. We're going to talk about first the great fathers. Theodore Roosevelt Sr., Prescott Bush, John Adams, Polk, great name, Alphonso Taft, Jesse Root Grant, Benjamin Pierce, Nathaniel Fillmore, Wilson's father, and H.W. Bush. Probably, in my opinion, one of the great fathers of a president is Teddy Roosevelt's father. Look at that, all right? Anybody want to guess what this is a picture of? So I think somebody said it. Huh? No, this was Abraham Lincoln's funeral march through New York City after he was assassinated, going through the country. So this is his funeral march. But in it, right up here, I got to get used to using this. Let's move it. You see that window there with those two little heads? The bigger head is Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt is watching the parade. From his 4-story brownstone mansion that he grew up in, he was wealthy. And he was there. What does Teddy say about his father? He was the best man I ever knew. He combined strength and courage with gentleness, tenderness, and great unselfishness. He was a big, powerful man with a face of a lion, and his heart filled with gentleness for those who needed help or protection, with the possibility of much wrath against a bully or an oppressor. This is what he thought about his dad. His dad is Theodore Roosevelt Sr. He's born in 1831 and only lives to 1878. He's an American businessman, very wealthy. He does plate glass. This is when everybody was starting to put glass in their homes and things, and he became very wealthy doing it. But this man was a philanthropist, and he believed in taking care of the rest of society. Children's Aid Society, Metropolitan Museum of Art, American Museum of Natural History, New York Children's Orthopedic Hospital. Unfortunately, he died when Teddy was 19 years old. Teddy is a freshman at Harvard. His father doesn't tell him that he has stomach cancer. And by the time he gets notice at Harvard to come down to New York, his father had died. And he didn't have a chance to say goodbye. His father, one thing about his history is a little unusual. His father, Teddy's father, had married a Southern woman whose family supported the Confederacy. So his father did not go into the army in the Civil War. In those days, you can take $300 and have somebody else go in. And that's what he did. And I think it always guilted him. So Teddy said, my father, a man of good works, he called him the strength, courage, tenderness, unselfish, discipline, inquisitive, boxing, tours, love of the outdoors. Teddy's father was the grandfather of Eleanor Roosevelt. 7th generation Dutch New Yorker. Let's go on. Number 2, impressive father, Prescott Bush. So this is H.W.'s father, Prescott Bush. He lived from 1895 to 1972, a banker, politician, Ohio Steel, railroad family, Wall Street executive. He was a senator from Connecticut from 1952 to 63. He was part of the Yale Skull and Bones group. That comes up a lot in quite a few of our presidents. It's sort of this secret cult thing if you go to Yale for seniors. He was an artillery officer in World War I. He won a medal. He was also the president of the U.S. Golf Association. He was very much involved with the interstate program that Eisenhower did. So all of us now drive on interstates. You know, if you grew up before the 50s, it's like we didn't have interstates. Now they're all over. And why did we build those interstates? Why did Eisenhower and these guys want to have an interstate highway system?
It was something about landing planes. He had so many feet of straight highway.
It was because of the military, right? So when Eisenhower is in Europe during World War II, he saw how important highway systems were for the military. So part of the reason is the ability to move our trucks and things around. One of the great things in infrastructure we've done in our country. All right. Prescott Bush fought Joe McCarthy. Not the strongest opponent, but at least he was opposed to McCarthy. He gave H.W. and the family morals, values, religion, and competition. They like to compete. Public service, and just one quick little fact, in The Guardian, English paper, there was a headline a few years ago, how Bush's, this is now George W.'s grandfather, helped Hitler's rise to power. He didn't really help Hitler's rise to power. He was in the banking business, and he had investments in banks in Europe and banks in Germany at one time, and so indirectly they said, "Well, you helped Hitler's," but it's amazing. It was stuff you can find. Next, the Adams family, except not this one. John Adams. We talked about John Quincy Adams and Abigail. All right, let's talk about John, the father. John Adams, our second president, born in 1735. Farmers in Braintree, Mass., tutors his kids, correspondence, read classics. He took John Quincy Adams all over Europe when he was a young boy. John Quincy Adams traveled more than any American citizen prior to the Revolutionary War. He had been a secretary to the minister of Russia, so he lived in Moscow. He was in Great Britain. He was in France. As a 14-year-old boy, he was all over. He was well prepared from that standpoint. He also did poetry. He did his diaries. He knew his parental expectations and values and ethics. And when I talked about exercise, John Quincy Adams got up every morning and went for a swim in the Potomac. Skinny dipping. Skinny dipping. So you can imagine our presidents today doing that. So this is the values we talked about, what he learned from his parents. James K. Polk, not one of our most famous one, but probably our greatest one-term president. He said, I'm going to run for one term, I'm going to do 4 things, and if I accomplish it, I'm done. And so he did it. He comes from a farmer, surveyor family in North Carolina. Then they moved to Tennessee. His father was Major Samuel Polk, was very involved in state politics in North Carolina, slaveholders. We still had our presidents all the way up to our 14th president were slaveholders. Till we got to Lincoln. James Buchanan, our 15th, wasn't. So it took us to about our 15th to 16th president not to be slaveholders. And then Andrew Johnson comes. That's a whole different thing we'll talk about. When we do, if you want to hear the rankings talk, we can do that. Anyway, this was a very sickly boy when he was young. He was number 1 out of 10 kids. They were Presbyterians. They were deists, Calvinistic, very hard work. This guy probably worked himself to death. He died 3 months after his presidency's over. And you can see, he finished his presidency in 1849. He dies in 1849. His father, Major Polk, was a country judge. They lived in a log cabin. He was friends of Andrew Jackson. So Andrew Jackson, sort of as Polk got to know Andrew Jackson growing up, Andrew Jackson got him into politics. He was an anti-federalist, so he didn't believe in big government. He believed in small government. His father was involved in the War of 1812 and was a land agent in Chapel Hill. I have no pictures of him. But this is the log cabin. And log cabins were still very relevant in politics all the way through Lincoln. The first 16 presidents, they prided themselves if they grew up in a log cabin. What were the 4 things? So he said, I'm going to be a one-term president. I'm going to accomplish these things. And he did. And what were the 4 things? Acquisition of the Oregon Territory, California, and New Mexico. So all of us sitting here now can thank James K. Polk. All right. He handled the Texas border dispute with New Mexico. They lowered tariffs. And he got a new banking system. Our first 100 years, we were fighting. Should we have a central bank? Should we not have a central bank? Back and forth and back and forth. But he finally said, yes, we need a central bank. The Fillmores. Millard Fillmore, the second least known president. If you ask a bunch of high school kids if Chester Arthur was ever a president, they say no. Nobody named Chester Arthur was. Well, if you ask them if Millard Fillmore was, they'd say no. Millard Fillmore is our president from 1850 to 53, a Whig. And why were they called Whigs? And it wasn't because of W-I-G. If you remember in England, the people who supported the monarchy were called Tories, and the oppositions were called Whigs. So when our politicians said, well, we're opposed to Andrew Jackson's policies, they became the Whig Party. The Whig Party eventually became the Republican Party. All right. Nathaniel Fillmore is his father, a tenant farmer, tavern owner. A lot of these kids, future presidents, their families owned taverns. They were public places to interact, to get to know people, to talk politics. All right. They moved to West New York. His father was a school teacher, but little education early on for Millard. His father was also a justice of the peace. He got Millard Fillmore a law clerk's job, but in those days, you could just study with a lawyer, and then you could take the bar. You didn't have to go to law school. He was against slavery as a president, but he didn't think the federal government could do anything about it. He signed the Compromise of 1850. This is the one where we have the Fugitive Slave Act, where if a slave got into the North, you were required to send them back. The party did not like Millard after his short-term presidency, and they did not renominate him. He goes on to join the Know Nothing Party. All right, what's the Know Nothing Party? This was a party that was anti-Catholic. And so people would say to these people, well, are you anti-Catholic? And they would say, I know nothing. I know nothing. Franklin Pierce. I mentioned Barbara Pierce. This is who she's related to. The president, Franklin Pierce here, number 14. Benjamin Pierce Jr. is his father. He comes from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, also a log cabin. His father was a lieutenant in the American Revolution, a tavern keeper once again, military big influence. He goes to Bowdoin. He's friends with Nathaniel Hawthorne, Franklin Pierce is. And he becomes nominated on the 49th ballot. The one thing I'll tell you is Franklin Pierce may have been our only alcoholic. Not that a lot of them don't like to drink, but he died of cirrhosis and tuberculosis, and he was depressed during his presidency. He had already lost 2 sons. His wife and his remaining son, Benny, did not want him to be president. They taking a train that went at 40 miles an hour, which was fast, down to Washington. The train falls off the tracks. He sees his son, Benny, the 11-year-old, get beheaded. So his whole presidency, he's depressed, the wife is depressed, and he drinks himself to death. I'll move pretty quickly now. I've got to watch my time. Ulysses Grant's father, very strong man, strong-willed father, taught him how to ride horses, to be educated, got him into West Point. But once he was done, Ulysses S. Grant is poor. For many, till the Civil War started, he didn't really have jobs. He had no money. And his father, who had money, could have given him some. He didn't. He refused to him. But he gave him the determination. He gave him the schooling at West Point, but didn't have a great loving relationship. Wonderful book to read on Ulysses S. Grant by Chernow. Any book by Chernow is very academic. You're going to have to read, there's footnotes a lot, but they're very good. So when you read about George Washington, he's written about, Hamilton, Chernow's a very good writer. Look at these 2 guys. William Howard Taft on your right, and his father with one of the great names, Alphonso Taft. This was a big, important political family in Ohio. He was a jurist, a diplomat, a politician, attorney general, secretary of war under Grant. He restored the integrity at the War Department, a dynasty. He was a strong abolitionist. He was also the minister of Austria and Hungary, minister to Russia. Also, he's the one who originated the Yale Skull and Bones. Very powerful Ohio family. He's on boards of university. William Howard Taft always wanted to be a judge. He didn't want to be president. But his wife wanted him to be president. He becomes president. But he, as just a few of our presidents, after he is president, he becomes the Supreme Court justice. Woodrow Wilson later nominates him, or Harding nominates him to be Supreme Court justice. And he was in heaven his last 15 years. So John Quincy Adams becomes a House of Representative after his presidency. Very successful. Howard Taft becomes Supreme Court judge. Wilson, his father's name was Joseph Ruggles Wilson. His father was a Presbyterian theologian. He organized the General Assembly of the Southern Presbyterian Church. He was the head of it for 37 years. He taught literature. He was a true Southerner. Wilson came from the Confederacy family. Wilson is a Democrat, wins because Taft and Roosevelt are fighting each other for Republican votes. Wilson becomes our president. He's a Democrat. But the country had already started integrating our government after Civil War. Wilson becomes president. He resegregates. He says, we're going to separate. We're not going to have African American people in government without it. Wilson's ranking is dropping like a rock over time because of his views of slavery, because of his views of segregation. But he got from his father religious faith, intellectual curiosity, sense of duty, morality, integrity, devotion to family. But truly, Wilson was a narcissist, had a Christ complex, according to authors. So we go to Prescott Bush, now I go to H.W. H.W., President George W.'s father. We already heard the story, an amazing family. George W., was he well prepared to be president? From a standpoint of his background, look at all the things he did. He was vice president, unofficial ambassador to China in the 1970s, ran the CIA, was our UN ambassador. POTUS, he becomes our 41st president as H.W. The question, he was very well prepared. If we had to put him in rankings, though, he didn't come out as high of it. So there are many times when we talk about who are the best prepared, doesn't mean they're always going to be great presidents. The worst, and I'll go through these. Lincoln's father, I mentioned his wonderful mothers. Lincoln's father was terrible. Farmer, carpenter, illiterate, very poor. He lost many title disputes about his land, had poor paying jobs. He was active in his church. I said he left his kids for 6 months. Thomas, the father, witnessed the grandfather, Lincoln's grandfather, Thomas witnessed his own father's murder. He never had any positive words for Abraham. He showed him no love. They had a strained relationship. Some people say, did he wonder if Lincoln was his own son, Abraham? He worked Abraham very hard on the farm, and he even lent him out to other farmers to do work. He was abusive and hostile. He did not value education. Lincoln did not go to his father's funeral. Okay? Thomas Lincoln did not go to the wedding and never saw the 4 children. So there wasn't much of a relationship there. The surprising thing is Lincoln's 4th child was named Thomas. So it seems a little strange. All right, we already talked about the Kennedy's family. Here we have Joe Sr., Joe Jr. to the left, and Jack. All right, Joseph P. Kennedy, 1888 to 1969, businessman, investor, politician, Irish-American, Boston. He became wealthy. He was an athlete. He got his money in the stock market, commodities, real estate, Hollywood studios, RKO, booze, legally though. He was also the Securities Commission for FDR. He was the ambassador to Great Britain. He did not think America should go to war against Germany. He thought democracy was finished in England. Some question if he was an inside trader. We talked about he had an affair with Gloria Swanson. He was a supporter of Father Coughlin, who was this tremendous anti-Semite and during the 30s. He had a stroke December 1961. So he saw Jack become president in January of 61. By 11 months later, he has a stroke. For Joe Kennedy Sr., communism represented a far greater danger than fascism. Kennedy soon became more than a mere ambassador. He became a trusted colleague to Chamberlain and Foreign Secretary Halifax, a man with whom they could confide freely. So he had a very close relationship, and he was telling them things that FDR did not want him to tell. He was obsessively focused on winning. A journalist who knew him speculated that for Kennedy, a mistress was another thing that a rich man had, like caviar. It wasn't sex, it was image. He was devoted to his children. He followed his children, and he made sure they were progressing, and he was always on top of that. But two pronounced features of Joe Kennedy's public persona in the years to come was his cultivation of the press and his obsessive interest in image building. We can all remember PT 109 from John Kennedy, PT where he's a hero. His father made sure the world knew about it. This man was an anti-Semite. Through and through, Joseph Kennedy Sr. was an anti-Semite. He used the word kikes. He said Jews spoiled everything they touch. Jews brought it upon themselves. He was a supporter of Lindbergh. Now again, America, this was pre-World War II. We were, again, thinking about America first and isolationism, and we're not going to war anymore. So he was a supporter of Lindbergh. He thought Hitler was the solution to the world's problems, and he was always wary of Jews. So the dilemma for FDR was Kennedy gave him a lot of Catholic votes. His relationship helped him with the Catholic votes in the United States. But FDR hated him, and FDR just didn't trust him. I'm going to watch our time. JFK loved his father, listened to his father when it came to politics, how to be a politician. But he didn't agree with his father when it came to the world, when it came to international stuff. He understood. Kennedy, as a young man, is in Germany in the 1930s. He's visiting Germany, and he can already see what's coming. And he writes a book about how England fell asleep and didn't wear it. So as a young man, he saw the world differently than his father. Nixon, his father, we talked about his mother. His father was very tough on him, also showing him no love, mean-spirited, angry. He physically beat them, and the mother was much more impactful. His values, though, he was an anti-communist, introverted and reserved, pragmatism, realist, but he believed in political engagement. Who was Leslie King Jr.? Gerald Ford's father. All right, he looks like his dad. Gerald Ford. His father is Leslie Lynch King Sr., so Gerald Ford's real name is Leslie Lynch King Jr. The man was a wool trader. He is divorced from Gerald Ford's mother 16 days after birth because he was abusive and an alcoholic. He never paid alimony. He lied to Jerry Ford all the way up to when Jerry Ford was in college. He kept saying, I'm going to pay. He never did. This man, she marries this man, Rudolph Ford, a paint salesman, a great man, raised Gerald Ford, who then took on his name. Gerald Ford had 3 rules: tell the truth, work hard, come to dinner on time. Clinton's father, all right, I told you earlier, William Jefferson Bligh, he died a few months before Clinton was born. So I'm going to skip these because we're coming to the end. Obama's father, I had mentioned his mother. Obama's father was an academic from Kenya, studied both in Hawaii but then to Harvard. He met Obama's mother in Russian language class at the University of Hawaii, went to Harvard grad, got an MA in economics. They divorced after 3 years. He became an advisor to the Kenyan government. He was from the Luo ethnic group. He had converted from Islam to Anglicanism. He loved basketball and jazz, but it's the impact of the grandparents on Obama that had more to do with his values. He only visited Barack Obama once in the first 10 years. So Obama only saw his father once. He writes this book, Dreams from My Father. He reflects on his life, exploring his experiences as a biracial individual with a Kenyan father and a white mother. It delves into his struggle with identity and the search for his roots. Again, our upbringings have so much impact on who we are. You know, I'm 71, 72 years old. I'm still thinking about what my parents say to me. You know, it never ends. Reagan's father, John Edward Jack Reagan, Ireland grandparents. Their name originally was O'Regan. I didn't know O'Regan. His father becomes an orphan at 6. They live in Illinois. He's a store salesman, traveling salesman, great storyteller. That's probably why Reagan was. Depression hit him hard. He was a populist Democrat, Catholic, opposed to the KKK. His father named him Dutch. Reagan's nickname was Dutch. Why? Because his father saw this fat little chubby baby. Says, "Oh, you look like a Dutch baby, a little Dutch boy," and that's how the nickname started. The problem was Reagan's father was an alcoholic, and significantly non-functioning alcoholic. Many days he was on the porch out, and Reagan had to take his father into the house and stuff. So it had great impact on Ronald. Here's a picture of his father and his mother. But his values, hard work and perseverance, personal responsibility, optimism, love of America, and limited government and individual liberty. I put an asterisk next to the personal responsibility because he wasn't responsible when it came to his alcoholism. And our final one, who is this? Final father. Well, one of you knows. Frederick Christ Trump Sr., 1905 to 1999, real estate developer, businessman, home construction with the grandmother. In Queens, New York, they built homes and supermarkets, 27,000 apartments. He was accused, it's amazing how it runs in families here, he is accused of profiteering in 1954 by the U.S. Senate. Then the state of New York in 1966 said you have unfair civil rights issues with your housing. And that time Donald was involved. There was racial discrimination. Donald was the fourth of 5 children, private school from kindergarten to 7th. He was in a military academy, went to Fordham, Wharton, and got draft deferments. But what did he learn from his father as we finish? Work ethic. You got to admit it. Work ethic. He works hard. Deal making, the art of the deal. Self-confidence, frugality, resilience, family loyalty, and never admit defeat or losing. We learn it. We can all blame our parents for whatever, all right? So I want to thank you all for the opportunity to let me do my own hobby here. And I'm happy to take any questions, comments, insights. If I got something wrong, it's only a hobby for me. It's not my profession. And then I'll repeat the question.
It's always been my thought that presidents were people who wanted to achieve themselves in the public eye. But it appears to me that they're performing for others, notably primarily their mothers. Is that overstating it?
I don't know if it's always. So the question is, he always thought that our presidents that's who they were, and they wanted to become famous. They wanted to be important. But in reality, are they also performing for their parents? And I would ask all of you, we probably all are. We probably always are. Our parents are always back. My wife would tell him, my wife's a psychologist, she would say, "Phil, let it go already. You're 72 years old. You know, let it go." But so yes. And not all of them really thought they were going to be president. You know, Gerald Ford in no way thought he was going to be president. And half of them were successful. Half of those might have been happy doing it. It's a tough job. All right, Ethel, go ahead.
You're probably not going to like this. But Sarah Roosevelt, FDR's mother,
Yep.
she passed away in 1941.
Oh, did I write 51?
Yeah.
Okay.
See newsreels. In 1941, he was wearing a black armband.
Good. So I've corrected, which I don't mind being corrected. So his mother died in 41, not 51. And now that you mention it, I do see pictures of him with a black armband. And I've never realized why he was wearing a black armband. I know. Way in the back.
Yeah. John Adams and John Quincy Adams were two of the first 14 presidents that did not own slaves. Neither one of them never owned.
That's correct. They were abolitionists. So John Quincy and John Adams didn't. By the way, John Adams, out of our founding fathers, our first 7 founding fathers, which is the only president that doesn't have a statue or monument in Washington, D.C.? John Adams. And he knew it. He even knew it early on. He says, these people aren't going to remember me. They're not going to like me. And so there's something going on now. People are trying to say, the man deserves a monument. All right, back. So on Joe Biden, the question is, what about Joe Biden's mother and father? I actually should talk about his father because he talks about his father all the time, right? His dad first had a job, then didn't, and was poor, and it did have great impact on him. So you're right, and next time I give this, I should add Joe Biden. I don't know a lot about his mother. I haven't read much about his mother, but Joe Biden does talk about his dad all the time. It's almost like you want to say, enough, Joe, because we know the story in Scranton. But, all right, go ahead.
Sure, for people who haven't taken the time to go to Nixon's presidential library in Yorba Linda or to the Mission Inn, to your point of the influence of Hannah Nixon, she was in the back seat, and Dick and Pat were in the front seat driving themselves. They were married at the Mission Inn, and Hannah was in the back seat holding a pie that she had made. They were married in what's now the bar in the front of the hotel just off the lobby. It was not a bar in those days. But you can read and learn more at his presidential library. Think of him. It's all interesting.
Agreed. Highly recommend going to any presidential library. And we're fortunate when we're out here, you're not far from the Nixon Library, you're not far from the Reagan Library. It's a day trip, and they're both again, my politics are different, but you learn a tremendous amount. And they're well done. They're very well done. All right, Roland. Oh. All right, so once again, thank you very much. If any of you want my slides, please, if any of you want my slides, write me. It's pkibort, all one word, @gmail.com. I'm happy to share my slides with any of you. And then you give the talk next time.